The first time it worked properly, people turned their heads. A footstep landed behind the player and slightly to the left. Not louder in one speaker than in the other. Behind. The head turned toward a corner of the room where there was nothing but a wall and a desk lamp. Then the person at the keyboard laughed, because a pair of cheap headphones had just fooled a part of the brain that does not usually get fooled. That effect came out of a company in Fremont, California, built on research NASA had paid for. It shipped inside a green and red cardboard box that cost $99 at retail. Reviewers called it the best positional audio available on a personal computer, and the games people actually played supported it. On December 10, 1999, that company won its patent trial against the largest sound card maker in the world. A jury in San Francisco cleared its chips of infringement. 4 months and 16 days later, it filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The usual explanation is that Creative Labs sued a smaller rival out of existence. That story holds in outline, and it stops one step short of the machinery. The verdict Aureal Semiconductor celebrated in December also handed Creative something, and because of what it handed over, the win did not switch off a single one of the costs that were killing the company. You remember what this sounded like the first time you heard it? A 4-inch plastic speaker on either side of a beige monitor, or a pair of headphones with foam pads that flaked apart within a year. Then a helicopter passed overhead in a game, and it actually passed overhead, front to back, and you sat there and made it do it again. For about 2 years, that was the argument in every computer shop in the country. 2 logos on the game box, 2 cards on the shelf at the same price, and no clear way to tell which one you were supposed to buy. The technology was called A3D. It worked from head-related transfer functions, which is a formal way of saying that the shape of a human head and a human ear changes a sound before the sound reaches the eardrum. Measure those changes, apply them to a sample in real time, and 2 speakers can place a noise anywhere around a listener. By its second version, a 3D went further. It read the geometry of the game world itself and calculated how sound bounced off the surfaces in it. A corridor sounded like a corridor because the software traced the corridor. Creative's competing technology, environmental audio extensions, worked from presets. A developer picked a room type, and the card applied a matching reverb to everything in it. Concert hall, sewer pipe, stone corridor. It did not calculate reflections off any actual surface. It applied an effect that sounded approximately correct. That difference is the whole reason people still argue about this on forums today. The mathematics did not start in a games company. It started with a NASA contract. In 1989, an engineer named Scott Foster founded Crystal River Engineering after NASA hired him to build the audio half of the Virtual Environment Workstation project, an early virtual reality rig for training astronauts. The hardware his team produced was called the Convolvotron, and it was a pair of circuit boards that filled 2 slots inside a PC. NASA's own spin-off report describes it plainly: a high-speed digital audio processing system that delivers 3-dimensional sound over headphones, developed at Ames Research Center for research into virtual acoustic displays. The papers behind it were published jointly by Foster and NASA researcher Elizabeth Wenzel. In May 1996, Aureal acquired Crystal River Engineering and renamed the technology A3D. A flight simulator component for astronauts became a consumer sound card feature in under 3 years. Aureal itself was assembled from a corpse. Its predecessor was Media Vision Technology, a Fremont company that made the Pro Audio Spectrum sound cards and then became the subject of what the Securities and Exchange Commission's San Francisco office called the largest fraud it had seen in Silicon Valley. MediaVision's stock traded at 46 and a quarter in January of 1994. Executives backdated contracts and concealed unsold inventory offshore to hold the number up. Within months, the stock was in single digits and the company was in Chapter 11. Chief Executive Paul Jane and Chief Financial Officer Stephen Allen were both criminally charged. Allen was sentenced to 3.5 years in federal prison. The reorganized company emerged, renamed itself Aureal Semiconductor, and inherited the debt, the Fremont address, and a reputation that had to be rebuilt from below zero. That is the starting position. A company with NASA-grade audio research, a criminal fraud in its own family tree, and investors who had already been burned once. The silicon arrived quickly. Aureal announced the Vortex AU8820 audio chip in July of 1997, and it appeared on cards from Yamaha and Turtle Beach. The second-generation chip, the Vortex 2, model number AU8830, was announced on August 6, 1998, and it was the only hardware ever built to process A3D 2.0. The card that made it famous was the Diamond Monster Sound MX300. It shipped late in 1998 on a green PCI board with a wavetable header and a small daughter card connector along the right edge. $99 at launch, $69 by July of 1999. Quad-channel output, a 320-voice wavetable synthesizer, Dolby Digital support, and DOS Sound Blaster compatibility handled through emulation rather than a dedicated chip. Aureal did not flood the market with the chip. It signed exclusive agreements with 5 vendors worldwide to use the Vortex 2, which in the United States meant Diamond and Turtle Beach and nobody else. That kept quality up and kept cheap clone boards off the shelf. It also meant the entire American fortune of the chip rested on 2 partners and their shipping schedules. Diamond put it into retail boxes and into whole machines. The MX300 shipped inside compact Presario desktops in early 1999 and inside the Alienware HiveMind, both specified with a Pentium 2 at 450 MHz. Reviewers were not gentle with sound cards in that era, and they liked this one. Maximum PC's write-up in November of 1998 admitted the feature list alone was enough to make them look away from the Sound Blaster Live box sitting on the same shelf. Developer support is the part that usually gets waved through in one sentence, so here's the count. 1 catalog of PC games with 3D audio support lists, 250 titles. A3D 1.0 appears in 101 of them. A3D 2.0 appears in 77. Creative's EAX 1.0 appears in 137, and EAX 2.0 in only 8. Read the titles rather than the totals. Half-Life supported A3D 2.0. So did Unreal, Quake 3 Arena, Deus Ex, Descent 3, Diablo 2, System Shock 2, and Team Fortress Classic. Thief and its sequel supported A3D 1.0. Those are not obscure demonstration titles. That is the short list of what a PC gamer in 1999 was actually playing on a Friday night. So the technology was real, the hardware existed, the price matched the competition, and the software support was there. Aureal was not losing on merit, and Creative knew exactly what was sitting on the shelf next to its own box. Creative's answer arrived on August 11, 1998. The Sound Blaster Live introduced the EMU-10K1 processor, a 2.44 million transistor chip rated at 1,000 million instructions per second, with hardware acceleration for direct sound and for EAX. The Live had advantages that had nothing to do with sound quality. It carried the Sound Blaster name, which had been printed on the side of game boxes for nearly a decade. It shipped through every retail and OEM channel Creative had spent that decade building. The cost-reduced Live Value Edition landed at $99, the same price as the MX300. 2 cards, same price, on the same shelf, in the same month. Under normal conditions, that fight gets settled by reviews and by the number of games supporting each standard. Conditions were not normal because 6 months earlier, the fight had moved into a courtroom. Creative Technology and its subsidiary EMU Systems filed suit against Aureal on February 26, 1998, in the United States District Court for the Northern District of California, case number C-98-0770. The patent at issue was number 5342990, titled Digital Sampling Instrument Employing Cache Memory held by EMU. Creative alleged that the Vortex chips infringed it. The suit landed one day after Aureal announced that it had won Vortex design slots with Dell. A design win with Dell is the moment a chip company stops being a niche supplier. That is the week the complaint was filed. Aureal responded in April with a counterclaim alleging fraud, defamation, and unfair competition. Later that year, a judge denied Creative's request for a preliminary injunction to stop Vortex shipments, ruling that the case was not strong enough and that an injunction would do unnecessary harm to Aureal. That is one case. There were more. On September 30th, 1998, Creative filed a second and separate action, this one for false advertising. It alleged that Aureal had made a series of misstatements about the Sound Blaster Live and its capabilities. John Danforth, Vice President and General Counsel of Creative Labs, described the problem as an escalation in rhetoric and pointed at claims Aureal employees had posted on the internet. Aureal's answer was to propose that both companies sit down and correct the published claims on both sides. That did not happen. In December of 1998, Aureal filed a patent suit of its own. It named Creative, Creative Labs, and EMU, and it asserted 2 Aureal patents covering the efficient presentation of high-quality three-dimensional audio, numbered 5596644 and 5802180. The inventors listed on both are Jonathan Abel and Foster, the same engineer who had built the Convolvatron for NASA. Aureal asked the court for an injunction against the Sound Blaster Live and the Live Value. Brendan O'Flaherty, Aureal's vice president and general counsel, put the company's position in 8 words. "We don't file these lawsuits for no reason." By the end of 1998, there were 3 active cases running between 2 companies in the same quarters that both were launching their flagship products. Consider who was carrying that at Aureal. O'Flaherty was general counsel and chief operating officer at the same time, one man holding both the litigation and the daily running of the company. At Creative, Danforth was vice president and general counsel, and that was the whole job. A company with one legal officer who also runs operations does not fight 3 simultaneous cases for free. It pays in the hours of the person who was supposed to be shipping product. The case that mattered went to a jury in San Francisco in late 1999, and on December 10th, the verdict came back. Every account of that day says Aureal won. Aureal's chief executive, Kenneth Kokonakis, who went by Kip, called it a victory for innovation and competition. Read the verdict as Creative described it the same day in its own press release, and a second half appears. The jury rejected each of the defenses Aureal had raised to invalidate the patent. Creative's patent number 5342990 was upheld and found valid and enforceable. Only then did the jury find that the Vortex and Vortex 2 chips did not infringe it. Creative announced its appeal in the same document. Danforth stated that Creative would seek both trial court and appellate review of the infringement finding, and that Creative believed it had a strong basis in law to obtain a reversal. He added that a new trial would focus only on infringement, without the other distractions this jury had faced. That second half is where the company died. Aureal did not win its way out of the litigation. It won one finding inside a case that was still standing, against a patent the same jury had just declared valid, with an appeal announced before the courtroom had emptied. The case was still standing, so the legal bills were still running. Look at what the spending was. Aureal's patent litigation expenses were $6.4 million in 1999, an increase of more than $6 million on the prior year. That is the cost of 1 year of a legal fight on a company whose entire fourth quarter revenue was $8.5 million. The money is only half of it. The other half is where the money and the attention landed on the calendar. The Vortex 2 was announced in August of 1998. The MX300 reached shelves late that year. The A3 to 2.0 titles, the Half-Life and Unreal generation, arrived across 1999. That is the window in which a chip company either takes the market or does not. It is the same window as the discovery, the depositions, the second suit, the countersuit, and the trial. The engineers and executives who should have been closing design wins and shipping drivers spent that period preparing for court. Kokkinakis said it directly when the results came out. The litigation and the trial process distracted the company. Fighting and winning a suit of that size was a major undertaking for a company Aureal's size, and it stretched both people and money, especially through the fourth quarter. David Domeyer, Aureal's chief financial officer, was more specific about the damage and blunter. He said the company could not measure the effect of the trial and the market disruption around it on the quarter's sales, but that customers had been confused by what was going on. Sales were lost. Costs were incurred preparing for and fighting the case. His summary of it was 7 words long: even when you're right and you win in court. Now the quarterly numbers make sense in order. Fourth quarter sales, $8.5 million, down from $11.2 million in the third quarter and down from $10.8 million in the same quarter a year earlier. Fourth quarter loss, $9.5 million against $3.5 million in the fourth quarter of 1998. Full year loss for 1999, $26.9 million against $18.5 million for 1998. Revenue falling, losses nearly tripling in a single quarter. In the exact quarter the company was in court winning. Investors read the same numbers. Funding stopped. Aureal posted those results on March 23, 2000. 1 day later, the entire executive management team was gone. Kokkinakis, Domeyer, Chief Technical Officer Foster, and Chief Operating Officer O'Flaherty all departed, along with the senior staff, while the board looked for turnaround management and considered whether to sell the company or wind it down. On April 26, 2000, Aureal filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection in a press release short enough to read in under a minute. The reporting on the collapse was unsentimental. The company burned through its cash until there was none left, and a large share of its 1999 spending had been outside its control. There was one more filing to come, and it was Aureal's own countersuit, the one accusing Creative of malicious litigation. Aureal never got that case in front of a jury. There was no money left to run it. The ending was transacted in a courtroom in Oakland. On September 21, 2000, the United States Bankruptcy Court for the Northern District of California entered the final order approving the sale of substantially all of Aureal's assets to Creative Technology, patents, trademarks, and the rest of the intellectual property. The price is usually quoted as $32 million. The structure is more interesting than the round number. Creative paid $28 million in cash, plus 2 new Creative shares for every 100 Aureal shares outstanding, which came to 208,079 shares, worth about $4.35 million. Those shares amounted to roughly 0.25% of Creative's enlarged share capital. The sale also settled all outstanding litigation between the two companies, which retired Aureal's malicious litigation claim permanently. Craig McHugh, president of Creative Labs, explained the logic in the announcement. Since no significant damages could be recovered from a bankrupt company, there was no upside in continuing this protracted litigation. The same release told shareholders that Creative did not believe the value of the acquired assets to Creative would be significant. Read those two sentences together. The assets were not worth much to the buyer. The competitor was. The people scattered into audio work that outlasted the company. Foster's name sits on both Aureal three-dimensional audio patents alongside Able, and Google's patent records list the current assignee on both as Creative Technology. Tony Schneider, Aureal's technology and marketing vice president through those years, went into software. McHugh and Danforth stayed with Creative Labs. The Sound Blaster Live continued as Creative's mainline into the early 2000s, and EAX kept shipping through the Audigy cards, while A3D stopped at version 3. The Diamond Monster Sound, MX300, never stopped working. It is in retro machines right now, a green PCI card seated in a white plastic slot next to a voodoo board in cases with beige plastic fronts that people specifically hunt for. Enthusiasts on Vogons still argue about which of the old driver revisions, 2015, 2017, or 2041, breaks the least under later versions of DirectX. The original 1.02 driver disk and the scanned Diamond manual are still hosted for download. Working cards trade for around $100, which is more than the card cost new in the summer of 1999. The chip in the middle of that board is doing arithmetic that was designed at Ames Research Center to keep astronauts oriented inside a simulator. It is running in a home computer in a spare room playing a game from 1998. The patents that describe it expired years ago. The card still works, and the company that made it was gone in under 5 years. If you owned one of these cards, or if you ever turned your head toward a speaker that was not there, subscribe, and the next one of these will find you.